Welcome to Stoughton Spotlight. I'm your host, Jeffrey Pickette. We're continuing our Conversations with the Candidates series, where I'll be interviewing the residents running for the contested positions in this April's town election. On this episode, I'm sitting down with one of the candidates for the Board of Selectmen. There are two positions on the Board of Selectmen open in this year's town election, and there are 6 candidates running for those 2 seats. So today I'm joined by Cynthia Walsh, who's a familiar face in the town of Stoughton. And thank you for joining me, Cynthia.
Thank you for inviting me.
So I guess we'll start the show with you're a former select woman. You're looking to get back on the board, and you've run the last couple of years. You're running again this year. What makes this year the right year to get you back on the board?
Well, I think every year that I run, and not one has been the right year. If you watch the meetings, you can see that there's a real need for wisdom and experience. You really need someone who knows what the job is, how a meeting should be conducted, how decisions should be made, and that's what I'm offering.
And so when you're looking at the Board of Selectmen meetings and you're present at every one, same seat in the Great Hall, what are you observing so far? What do you take away from the way the meetings are being run, in your opinion?
Well, I don't think they're run well. There's a way to run a meeting, and there's a way to make a decision. What seems to be happening is there's a reluctance to make a decision. Adjusting the water and sewer rates took 7 months from the initial hearing. That's revenue that's been lost, which means that the taxpayers will have to make up the difference between what it costs to deliver those services and what the ratepayers are paying. I think we missed 2 cycles of billing. I pay the same water rates as everyone else, and no one likes to see an increase, but it is an enterprise fund. And every dollar that it doesn't have comes out of the taxpayers. And that comes up to hundreds of thousands of dollars that can't be spent on other things. Also, the police chief search. It shouldn't have taken 10 months to come up with a police chief. And I'm really concerned that Selectmen, the current board has voted not to renegotiate with the present town manager, which means he leaves in June. They haven't even talked about advertising to fill that position. It's the most important position on the town side. And I wonder how many months we'll be limping along with an acting or an interim before they make a decision. It took months for them to come up with even an ad for the police chief search. And then all of a sudden, everything had to be rushed. You have to meet at 9 o'clock in the morning or 10 o'clock in the morning, times when working people can't be there or watch it, when people are busy, so that this kind of stuff is done out of sight. It doesn't do any good for me to be there if I'm just sitting there. People say, oh, well, you'll be at every meeting, win or lose. I need a seat at the table to make a difference. If you've watched the meetings, you know that when I've tried to intercede in something, I've been berated, belittled, and threatened. And I'm not the only citizen that that's happened to. That's no way to treat people.
Well, you brought up a couple of topics I'd like to get into. We'll start with the first one you brought up, and that's the police chief search. And let's fast forward to the end of the search, where the board decided to not hold the public interviews that were scheduled and instead go based on the recommendation solely from the assessment center. If you were sitting up on the board and you were one of the 5 members, would you have been in favor of that, or would you have wanted to go through with the public interview process?
I was a teacher. I would never evaluate a child based on one test. This was wrong. It wasn't fair to the applicants. Were they told at the beginning of this, when you put in your application, you're going to be assessed and we're going directly By the score, they weren't given time. My understanding is they were not given adequate time to prepare. Certainly someone who has been doing the job for 10 months has an automatic advantage over folks that haven't. Now, if you're going to do a search and you're going to ask people to apply, it has to be fair. There should have been public interviews. The public pays the salaries, not the selectmen. They had a right to see the choices. Not all 5. That's why we had the assessment, to narrow it down. But at least the top 3 should have been given the opportunity to make their case to the public and to the board. This was a closed system. It doesn't sound fair to me. If I was one of the people that went through the process, applied, sent in my resume, sat through what I think was a 3-day assessment, and then to be told, oh, it's all based on that one score, sorry. It doesn't sound fair. It doesn't look fair. And it's never the way it's been done. We don't just pick someone out of thin air. When I was on the board, we had open interviews for town clerk. I've been on the board for the selection of 4 town managers. This isn't the way it's been done. I was on the board when we chose the previous chief, and it wasn't done this way either. There were public interviews.
Well, that being said, though, are you pleased with the end result, or speak to the significance of the end result, where there'll be a permanent chief and happens to be the first female chief in the department's history?
I have no problem with a female police chief. My sister Susan was the first female detective in Stoughton. That was 30 years ago. It's a shame it's taken 30 years. Not a lot of women go into police work. Not a lot of women advance from patrolman to sergeant to lieutenant. The police chief that we have now was the first female sergeant, the first female lieutenant, and now the first female chief. So obviously a person with a great deal of talent and ability. But I wouldn't like to be chosen for any job over other candidates based on one criteria. And that's not fair to the person who ultimately gets the position, and it's not fair to the other applicants. What's going to happen the next time this comes up? Is this a pattern where some hired group is going to assess people? They weren't from Stoughton. They don't pay taxes in Stoughton. And they will select someone, and the board will just get in line for that. That's not why we elect people. What I'm seeing with the current board is the inability to make an educated decision. Everything is tabled. Everything is put off. Even the minutes take months to approve because one member says he hasn't read them. Well, the other 4 members should say, we've tabled this before. And the 3rd or 4th time something is tabled, it's time to make a decision. They're very concerned about public opinion and phone calls they receive or emails or what's said about them on social media. When you're elected to fill a position, you do the job. People have had their say when they voted for you. And you shouldn't be making your decisions based upon whether people on social media like you or not. Nobody likes, what is it, Abraham Lincoln said, you can't please all the people all of the time. And a lot of people aren't on social media. So they're letting a small group control what they're doing, which isn't the way it should be done. They're supposed to be the best interest of the most people in town.
So, in addition to the police chief, you also mentioned in a previous answer the town manager. And the town manager search is going to be something that, or rather just what to do with that position is going to be something that the next Board of Selectmen is tasked with. So if you are on that board, what would be your ideal way to rectify this situation? One, I guess we'll start simply. One, in is it your preference to see the current town manager stay on? I guess we'll start there first. Would you prefer Michael Hartman to remain?
If he wishes to. Obviously, it's a difficult position, and he's been under attack for over a year by various people. One of the reasons why the town doesn't move ahead, as many of us would like it to, is the revolving door at Town Hall and the revolving door at the police station, too. If a town gets a reputation for a lack of stability, then people don't want to work here, they don't want to come here. When you want to bring a business to Stoughton and you start with one town manager and then you're on to another town manager, or you started with a certain number of selectmen and now it's the board has changed, and it makes it very difficult to attract people to town. What I noticed lately is when we are putting out RFPs and asking people to bid on things, we're getting fewer and fewer bids. Part of that is because the bills aren't being paid, because the selectmen aren't signing the warrants in a timely manner. The warrants, the bills for the town are supposed to be signed once a week by at least 3 members of the board, and it's not happening. So employees can't get their paychecks, vendors don't get their bills paid, so the town gets a reputation for being lackadaisical about paying its bills. Nobody out there wants to work with that kind of community. You have to be able to rely that when you perform a job for a community, the check's in the mail.
So let's say that you had indicated that you would prefer, if he was willing, for Michael Hartman to stay, but let's say that that doesn't happen and that there is a search for a new town manager and you are on the board. What format, what process would you be in favor of to search for and select a new town manager?
Well, this is scary. You're saying that we'll be looking for a town manager in 2 months.
Right. So what would your plan be in terms of finding an interim, hiring the permanent town manager? Just kind of walk me through what your process would be and how you would hope to see this play out.
Well, we'd do it the way we did it when I was on the board and we hired Mr. Hartman. Is advertise. Then you have a committee, subcommittee, go through the candidates. Sometimes they interview, and then they narrow it down to the top 4 or the top 5. But I'm worried about what kind of pool of candidates we're going to get if this is what people read in the newspaper. And the other problem is we're going to be in competition with Easton, because Easton just fired their town manager. Being town manager or the superintendent of schools, you've got 1 foot on a banana peel. It just seems in New England is if something isn't going because we keep, you elect new selectmen over and over, as they just did in Easton. They got the right 3 to dump their town manager, and that happened here in Stoughton. So it's very hard. The pool is very small, and if a community gets a reputation for instability, that you are going to please this group, but next year they may not be here, how are you going to attract quality people? It took a while to come up with someone who had the experience and the education to do the job. I think some people think that the town manager sits in the office and rules like a king and just says that this will be done, rather than the work it takes and the experience and the knowledge it takes. I think a lot of folks think they can do, oh, I could do that job. I'm sure there are many parents who would come to parent conferences and look at me and say, well, I could teach 5th graders. But then when you have a day when people can come in and do that, first you don't get too many people volunteering, and then you get people on their way out going, I don't know how you do this day after day.
So looking at the budget, certainly something that's going to be a topic of discussion is public safety staffing. So where do you stand on that right now with it obviously costs money to staff additional police and firemen, but there also seems to be a documented need for that. How do you balance the two of giving the police and fire the staffing they need, but also keeping an eye on the bottom line?
Something has to give. There isn't enough money for everything. You can't just count on more and more money. 2.5% increase, which is what's legally allowed, isn't going to cover it. It doesn't cover the raises for the current population of employees, plus the equipment and things we need. So you have to really sit down, and I never heard during the discussions for these positions what it was going to actually cost. Not just the salaries, but outfitting the people, training the people. So I don't even know what the hard cost is. It sounded at a recent hearing before the Committee on Finance and Taxation that the 4 police officers, that's going to cost between $600,000 and $800,000.
Well, is that keep taking dollars and cents into account, the financial side of it? Are you in favor of adding to the police and fire department in this budget cycle?
Only if we can afford it, and I don't think we can afford 4 and 4.
Where would you cut in order to add some positions, even if it's not 4? Are there places in the budget that you've kind of looked at and have said, you know, this is an area we could trim down a little bit?
No. The only budget that is big enough would be the school budget. And the selectmen met with the school committee. They met with the chairman and the vice chairman of the finance committee. I think it was a 10:30 a.m. meeting. And the school department, the superintendent said flat out, we're not cutting anything. We can justify every dollar. That's where the bulk of the money is. And even with the declining enrollment, the feeling still is we still have these costs. We still have to have this many teachers. And I don't think that that's fair. I don't think a 3.8% increase in the school budget is fair. Even when we have as many schools as we had in the 70s when we had twice as many students. Now, I'm not saying go back to 30 kids in a room or 25 kids in a room, but we supposedly closed the Jones School and relocated those students. We've spent millions of dollars on that building that was too decrepit to continue to be an elementary school. Many of the classrooms have been turned into office space. If you go from school to school, a lot of classrooms have become office space or some other use rather than classroom space. I think there has to be a reasonable assessment of how much space do we need for the number of students we have. You're probably aware that the present high school at one time held 2,500 students. The building that we're building, based on what the state will allow us to build, because they're contributing so much to the building, is 1,069. That's a class size of about 250 students. And there was a time when there were 550 students. And yet people say, well, that will attract more people. Building that school is going to attract more young families. Well, not according to the state projections. Stoughton's pretty much built out. Where are you going to put the new people?
Well, and not just that, where do you find new revenue? Because there's, down the line, there's need for potential replacing of the fire station on Freeman Street, and they've been talking about maybe like a joint public safety building. The elementary schools are getting up there in age, and they've been trying to put through a statement of interest on the South School now for the last number of years. So where does the town find additional revenue through a residential or commercial to pay for projects like this, to pay for additional police and fire?
Well, there is some good news on the horizon. It's, 1 block away from this building? A new hotel. Hotels are bonanzas because you're getting the business tax rate, you're getting the meals tax, and you're getting the room tax. And if they sell alcohol, that's another thing. So that's good news. The other good news is our debt to the MWRA is going to be reduced and dramatically, but not until, not until maybe 5 years. So there's good news on the horizon. A lot of the borrowings will be paid off. The bad news is, and what a lot of people are saying now they didn't realize, is they're going to be paying for the high school for 20 years. We haven't even started paying, and people are already complaining about their tax bills because of the 2.5% increase and the reevaluation. So you can imagine when we start borrowing, and I believe it was said that we'll be starting in July to start borrowing for the high school, the taxes are going to go up dramatically. I think the minimum they said was $300, and other people are going to see a significant amount. And that's another thing. How do you get young families into a town with the tax bills that we'll have? It's one thing to say, well, I'm selling my house and we have a new high school, but people, intelligent people, say, well, what's the tax bill on this property? Well, you better sell your house before July and we start borrowing, because it's going to zoom up. And folks have to take that into consideration. Now, it is possible, because we've done a lot without any debt exclusions. We did Public Works, we did the Senior Center, the renovations for Town Hall, the firehouse on Central Street, the police station that we have on Rose Street. It is possible, but it's not possible if people think that the budget is a Christmas list and that Santa's going to pay for it, because Santa isn't. When you make out a list, you need to check it more than twice, and you have to compare it with revenue. I didn't see a lot of that. Now, obviously, the Finance Committee is going to be doing that. And the chairman of the Finance Committee has a very different view of the budget. Now, I don't know yet. It's early days. They're just doing their hearings now. I don't know if he has the majority of his members on his side. He wants to take $2 million out of this budget. Now, he hasn't said yet where it's going to be. His subcommittees are all working. Now, the feeling, I don't know where that $2 million is going to come from. And he wants to put that money aside for these projects that we're talking about. Because we have a building stabilization fund, we have a stabilization fund, we're going to have a fire equipment stabilization fund if town meeting passes it. He wants to put that money into these, if you will, savings accounts, so that when we finally do come to a point where we're going to go with the joint police fire, we don't even have a location. The selectmen turned down the location that the committee came up with. So we're not anywhere near where we need to be for that. I mean, obviously you need a location, because you design the building based on the needs of the departments and the configuration on the site. The site determines, if you're going to build something, site determines what it's going to look like. Is it going to be spread out? Is it going to be 2 stories, 3 stories? We don't know without a site. And I haven't heard them. I mean, this keeps coming up. But there's concrete steps that have to be taken. You don't just wake up one day and say, I think I'll build a firehouse. And it's government. I mean, Donald Trump can sit down and say at his office, not the presidential, but his work office, and say, I'm going to build a hotel. I'm going to buy some property and I'm going to have it designed, I'm going to build it. And he could probably do that in 18 months. That's not the way government works. We have to have a committee to find the location, then we have to approve the location, the Board of Selectmen does. Then town meeting has to appropriate the money for the study and the design. We're talking at least 5 years. But you have to start. You can't say to people, we're going to have a public safety building and not start the process. Because what you're saying is, as my mother people would say, you know, white men speak with forked tongue. You're not telling me the truth. You're telling me, I think that in life there's gonna people, they're gonna do this and they're gonna do that, and they never do it. I'm one of those persons that I know the steps. I've seen it done. I've been on a lot of these committees over the years. You've got to start. Look at the library. And it's not even a whole new library. It's expanding on the one we have and fixing it up, renovating it. 10 years. And I don't know, the high school, maybe it took 8 years, but by the time we build it, it'll be 10 years. This is a long-term process. And you have to be upfront with people. Because we all want our cake today. I want my cake today. But someone has to buy the ingredients, and someone has to make the cake before you get your cake.
So in the last minute, in the half hour goes by quickly, right?
Was that one question?
Yeah, right. Tell voters why you should be one of their 2 choices in April. Why should Stoughton voters put you back on the Board of Selectmen?
And which is my camera?
That's right, okay. Right over there.
Most of you know me. You know that I don't hide things. You know that I'm a speaker of the truth. Even if your kid was in my class and he was copying other people's homework, I told you. I don't hide things. There's nothing up these sleeves. I'm a taxpayer. I have been one in town since, I've lived in town since 1948, but I've been a taxpayer since 1980. I get the same ugly bill you get, and I have to look around for the money. I get the same water bill. I get the same trash bill. I know the process. It's important to elect people who know the process, who don't promise you pie in the sky, who know how to make the pie and how to get the funds together to pay for the pie. So I appreciate one of your votes on April 4th. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today, and thank you for tuning in. I'm Jeffrey Pickette, and you've been watching Stoughton Spotlight. Please make sure you watch some of our other Conversations with the Candidates series. Again, the Board of Selectmen race is contested this April's town election. There are 6 candidates running for 2 spots. I also want to thank, before I sign off, Michael Hartman for directing. And once again, thank you for tuning in.